My name is Michael Cohen, C-O-H-E-N. The date is July 24th, 1995. We're interviewing Robert Leroy in Elgin, Illinois, in the United States. Could you please tell me your name and spell it?
My name is Robert Leroy. It's two syllables, L-E-R-O-Y.
And your name at birth. Could you spell that too?
Yes, Otto Lefkovich. L-E-F-K-O-V-I-T-S. Otto is spelled O-T-T-O.
Did you have any other name?
Yes, Chaim Ben Tzvi. That was my Hebrew name.
So your nickname was?
Otto.
Otto. Okay, and what was your date of birth?
Date of birth is November the 26th, 1924.
Your age now is what?
I'm 71 years old.
Can you tell me the city you were born in and the country, please?
Yeah, I was born in Budapest, Hungary, but I lived in Nyírmada, N-Y-I-R for Roger, M for Mary, A, D for David, A. That's where I grew up.
Thank you. We're going to go way back at this point, and how do you feel about doing this interview? What motivated you to do this?
What motivated me to do this happened over 18 years ago when a professor in Northwestern University in Evanston, Illinois, published a book called The Hoax of the 20th Century. After the book was published, I felt tremendously hurt that in my lifetime, which at that time was just 30-some years, 32 years after I was liberated from Auschwitz and Bunzlau, here comes a group of people who are denying that the Holocaust ever happened, and with the tragedy of my people was pushed in the background. And one of the statistics that he offered at that time was that if you, quote, want to have proof that all the Jews were not killed in Auschwitz and other concentration camps, all you have to do is go to New York and you can see 2 million of them. I was very, very hurt, and I organized a group at that time called the Witnesses to the Holocaust, which is, in effect, I am. And the members of my family were the charter members at that time. The purpose of it was that in every way that we possibly can vocalize the tragedy of our people, and to make certain that people like Dr. Butts, and at that time Jesse Jackson picked up the keynote speech, and he made a quote that I recall, quote, that I'm sick and tired of hearing about the Holocaust. I have taken Jesse Jackson on, and I have publicized our efforts with great success, and a lot of people came to our aid, and we were at that time establishing a focus that indeed a Holocaust had happened, and the tragedy of my people indeed is real. And that is what have motivated me since, and I have ever since been very active, going to various high schools, lecturing youngsters as to what has happened to me, what can happen when hatred engulfs a group of people, and what had happened to my entire generation of people, and how I have personally lost 47 members of my family.
You mentioned that Elie Wiesel had some interest in this project also.
Yes, Elie Wiesel is a friend of mine. Elie Wiesel comes from a town not very far from my hometown of Nyírmada that I spelled for you before. And as a matter of fact, I have a picture that later on I'd like to show you that was taken at the concentration camp where Elie Wiesel and myself are in that picture. It's a very infamous picture. It's all over the world, was seen, and it's prominently displayed in Yad Vashem as well.
Where was that? What camp was that?
That was in Auschwitz. That was in Auschwitz. So if I may, perhaps to tell you, from the very beginning of my story, and that is the reason that we are here, so you understand, and everybody else who will listen to me and this tape throughout the years that it will exist, and I hope, dear God, that will exist for a lot of years, not for the popularity of my voice, but for the message of what I have in this few minutes that we're going to spend together. So the first thing I'd like to tell you was that in Nirmada, in that village where I was, my father's homeward, was a village of 5,000 people altogether. All the inhabitants were no more than 5,000. The reason that I was born in Budapest because I was the firstborn for my mother, and she was a city girl, and she went home to give birth, and I was born in Budapest. All my brothers and sisters were born after me in Nirmada. And this was a simple village where the population, percentage of the population was pretty much the same as the population was throughout Hungary. And approximately 8 or 9% of the population was Jewish. And we have lived in this community of about 150 Jewish families in relative harmony with our neighbors. And I must emphasize from the beginning that in this village, my family had a cemetery markers dating back over 350 years. So we were not Johnny-come-latelys to this community. We lived and worked in this community. My father was a horse dealer. My mother was a housewife. And we lived and went to school in this community. We were not a suitcase society. We have never traveled anywhere of a further distance than the local markets, where my father went to either sell or buy horses. And we lived with relative harmony. And as the years went on, times didn't change anything. Between 1924 and I was born, in 1938, life was the way I knew it. And then I went away to school. I went to Budapest. I was a good student, and I had a scholarship, and I went to a gymnasium. And after 2.5 years, they have made some new laws. They introduced some laws in Hungary whereby Jewish people were not permitted to go to school except for 8% of the total student population. And that was called numerus clausus. I have made the first cut because based on my grades, I still remained in school for a few more months. After that, they have further restricted the law, and I could no longer go to school there, and I had to interrupt my education. And I came back home and lived and worked with my father, helped as best I could to provide a living for our family. The community that I described to you were principally Catholic. And the first time that we have noticed the accent on a great deal of anti-Semitism was when Hitler marched into Austria, and Hungary have received back certain groups of people who are claimed to be Hungarians. A great portion of them were Jews, and they were from Czechoslovakia, and they were from Romania. At that time, there was a movement started in Hungary which was very pronouncedly anti-Semitic.
About what time was this? The year?
If my recollection serves me correctly, that was in 1940 or about.
Can we go back just a little bit, because we want to spend maybe the next 20 minutes before even this period.
Right.
Were there rich Jews, poor Jews? What was the community like? Were there, everybody got along? Or what?
Everybody got along well. We had very few rich Jews and a lot of poor Jews. We were one of the poor Jews in the vicinity or in our country. But everybody went to one shul. Everybody went to cheder. and everybody had their cholent made at the same bakery. Every Friday we took the cholent to the bakery, which was about 3 or 4 houses away from our house. And so we lived in a harmonious Jewish community, for that matter, harmonious with the entire population up to about the early part of 1940. And
were you religious?
no, I would not call myself religious. And if we want to talk about religion, I would tell you that the entire community was Orthodox. That was an Orthodox community that I grew up in. But we always went to shul. My father, every single day of his life, put on a tefillin and talis. My mother had kosher, nothing but kosher. My mother lit the Shabbos candle every single Friday night. We went to shul with everybody, but we were not Hasids, and the great percent of the people were Hasidims in our community. As a matter of fact, one of the largest yeshivas in the eastern part of Hungary, where we were the yeshiva in our village, and the rabbi was Rabbi Jacob Jungreis. And if I may digress for a minute, he is the man who had 13 children and 1 grandchild, and not one member of his family have returned. And if you want to talk to me about religion and God at this point of our conversation, I must tell you that I grew up in a very decent, observant Jewish home. And what has happened to me in Auschwitz and after Auschwitz in the concentration camp, and the discovery how they have destroyed my family, God and I have parted ways, and I couldn't and I wouldn't go to a shul or to a minyan, or couldn't or wouldn't put on a tefillin or a talis for almost 48 years. And if we come to this at a certain point, the reason I'm mentioning it, because you asked me about religion, that it was a turnabout in my life that I did put on a talis and a tefillin, because my rationale was that this is not God who did what happened to us, but man, with the direct consent of God, which was permitted to happen. But man was the guilty one, not God. So I absolve God's far as guilt is concerned. And I'm not religious today, but I go back to my roots, in a sense that I recognize and I remember where I come from. But so let us just go on with this conversation in a sequence as the way I like to present it to you, that in about the 1940s, as great waves of anti-Semitism has taken over our community and our country. But at that time, they really did not hurt us other than words.
In your community?
In our community, and for that matter in Hungary.
Did you know anything about Hitler's invasion of '39 to Poland, or was there any information?
Yes, we did know that, of course.
How did you find out?
That was publicized. That was not only publicized, but triumphantly publicized, that how easily Hitler had made the conquest to Austria, to Czechoslovakia, to Poland, and then later on to the Ukraines.
How was that publicized?
The Hungarian press publicized all of Hitler's conquests. The Hungarian press was totally silent on any of the atrocities that was committed under Hitler when he conquered this portions of citizenry of Poland, of Czechoslovakia, of the Ukraines. And Hungary was, as you probably know, the last country where Hitler had occupied. But we are not there in the conversation yet, if I may. I'd like to tell you that...
Can I ask one question?
Sure.
Since the synagogue life was pretty central to your father and all, what did the rabbi have any were there statements made by the rabbi? Were people in unity? Were they afraid? Did the rabbi say anything? Or what was going on?
As a
in
matter
there?
of fact, yes. The Rabbi Jungreis, was a very religious and well-meaning person, and a friend of mine who I have met in 1980 in Israel, who I knew from my childhood. He was from Hungary. I never knew that he survived. And we met, and he told me, he was a fervent Zionist. He told me about my age, that he came to the rabbi, to Rabbi Jungreis, in late 1943, early 1944, and said to him, Rabbi, you must publicize, you must tell the people what is happening. We have found out what they're doing to the Jews in Poland. And Rabbi Jungreis have vehemently opposed it and have put an absolute silence on it, and it says, God will help us, and we will not hear anything about that. We will not tell it to anybody. We don't want to know about it. So, as a matter of fact, if anything, Rabbi Jungreis have played an unwilling hand in shielding us from whatever little bit we would have known through the Zionist movement of what has happened to us, to other Jews in Poland, and therefore we could have surmised what will happen to us, but we have never known that at all. Going back to the late 1940s, where this what they call Nyilas,
The early 1940s.
pardon me, the early 1940s, when the Nyilas, which is the Hungarian fascist organization, was bourgeoising, and they have gained a great deal of popularity. And beating of Jews became more frequent. Laws were made whereby movements were somewhat curtailed. Everybody had to have ID papers, although everybody knew everybody. We didn't have to introduce ourselves to anybody. Everybody knew that although I was blonde and blue-eyed, and so was my brothers and sisters, and my father, he was a Hungarian cavalry soldier and officer, and we didn't have to introduce ourselves as being Jews, because everybody knew that we were Jews. But we had to, at that time, not wear any identification, but carry with us identification papers. And it became more and more pronounced as Hitler's advances were made into the Ukraine, and particularly at the early part of his military successes in the Ukraine, where the newspapers were totally full of how he marched through the Ukraines and how he is now in the midst of Russia, and he is going to Moscow and he's going to Leningrad and so on.
But nothing about his relationship to the Jews.
No, at that point, no. Nothing that was publicized. And I would like to make certain that I emphasize that the propaganda of Hitler's were so enormously effective that we were completely and totally shielded from the horrors that he has committed in other parts of Europe. We didn't know anything about it. And if the statement is anywhere correct that we went like lambs, the truth of it is that yes, we did. Why? Because we didn't know the fate that it awaits us. But let's go back to the late 40s and 41, and maybe even 42, where the Jews were openly persecuted. The Catholic Church has taken, at least in our community, and as far as I know, in the entire Hungarian community, on a role whereby the church was silent. Not a word was said about Hitler's bad deeds. As a matter of fact, the teachers in the Catholic schools were the most vehement anti-Semites who has openly taught anti-Semitism in the schools. And as they preached anti-Semitism, it was manifest itself of how many windows were broken that day, or how many Jewish heads were broken in that day by the students who listened to the lectures of those teachers. I and my brothers and a group of others have taken some steps at times where we protected the yeshiva bochers who were unfortunately the type of people who never fought, never learned how to fight. They turn their back and they run. And we have told them not to run, told them to stand fast and to fight back. But it was no avail because we were tremendously outnumbered, and the violence was not that bad at that point, other than a broken nose or a broken head and a broken glass. And life went on. In our community, there were some people who are outright anti-Semite. Most people have shut themselves into their world, and they did not make any attempt to protect us. And I, at this point, don't want to diminish the conversation to talk about the righteous Gentiles. I have met one or two righteous Gentiles later on in the concentration camp itself, certainly not in Hungary before I was deported, because no Hungarian or no one ever stood up to say, don't do it. No one ever made that distinction. And so we went about our lives as we always have. Life was even more difficult now because by 1943, the business of my father was very well falling a hard time, because to sell horses, the aristocrats was no longer my father's customer because he was a Jew. The Jewish landowners no longer could buy horses because they no longer had lands, because the Nazis took away their lands. So we made whatever meager living we made, we existed. And I don't know if this is an appropriate time for me to talk about perhaps the time that it came when Hitler marched into Hungary. Or do you want me to go into a little bit more of a detail?
We will go a couple more minutes on this earlier period, then we'll get into the,
okay, you have any specific
the period
thoughts?
of when you were ghettoized, so to speak. You had family, you had brothers, and I know that we've talked to one,
Yes.
Maybe two at this point. I've talked to
Two,
Stephen.
because the three of us survived.
George
Yes.
also was
George.
interviewed.
Yeah.
You all lived together in the same house?
Yes, we all lived together in the same house. Everybody was born in the same house except me. I was born in Budapest, as I was explaining to you. My father was married twice. My mother was the second wife of my father. The first wife of my father died of cancer. And that was a shidduch made with the rabbis, that my mother to become my father's wife. And so that happened. And my father had 5 children alive at the time of our deportation from the first marriage, and 5 children from the second marriage. And the 5 children from the second marriage was me, Otto, my brother George, my brother Steve, my little brother Miklos or Mickey, and my little sister Gabriella. From my father's first marriage, the children were, who were home, Anna, my sister, my brother Paul, who was drafted and went to the Russian front, where he died, where we understood they were marched on to clear mine fields for the Germans. They took a group of Jews and lined them up 100 abreast and marched them forwards and put machine guns on their heels. They had no choice but march. And whoever stepped on the mine died, whoever didn't survived. And my brother Paul died in the Ukraine clearing minefields. My other brother Yoshi was also in the labor camp, but he was more fortunate. He survived. He came home. His wife and his 2 children died, but I talk about it later. My sister Margaret, who didn't live at home, was married, lived in Boloshajarmat. He was married to my uncle Mate Maibam Mihai, who died in Mauthausen. And she, my sister Margaret, together with her daughter Heidi, together with her son, who was at that time 10 years old, her daughter was 14 or 15 years old, were deported to Auschwitz. My sister Margaret survived. Her daughter Heidi survived with her. Her little boy Pishta died in Auschwitz. Her husband died in Mauthausen. My father's name was Herman Lefkovich. My mother's name was Regi Maibam. And together with my mother and father and my brothers and sisters, we were taken to Auschwitz. But I will tell you about that in somewhat of a more of a detail, how and when that happened. You want me to go a little bit further into the family background? I have 47 names that at one point in this conversation I'd like to share with you and I'd like to share with every listener of who these 47 people are who were killed in Auschwitz or in Mauthausen of my family. And as I mentioned to you earlier, Mike, you know that I have devoted a great deal of my life to lecture high school students, and as a matter of fact have seminars for teachers who teaches the Holocaust, to personalize my tragedy. And the way that I can do it best is if I tell you or I tell anybody the story, not how they killed 6 million people, of my people, but how they killed 47 members of my family. Because I can tell you that if you are not a victim of the Holocaust, if you're not a survivor, but if you're a willing listener, and if you're able to put yourself into our shoes and to the shoes of all the survivors of what happened to us, you will understand and have an entirely different perspective why they have done what they did and what they did to us. It's not an easy thing to talk about this in this sense of the word, but it's a necessary thing to talk about, because if we don't tell you what has happened, the Dr. Butzes, who I mentioned to you in the beginning of the conversation, and the Jesse Jacksons, who they go unbridled, will totally and completely attempt to erase from the memory of what has happened. And can you imagine what a horrible, horrible event that would be in the history of mankind if they would be successful, if we wouldn't remember. You know, at this point of my story, I must tell you that as we all, as Jews, gather at Pesach and recite from the Haggadah of how we were all liberated and how we were all enslaved in Egypt, I must tell you that we, I think, the survivors, are the ones who write our current Haggadah, how they have attempted to totally destroy us. And at this point, I must tell you a political feeling that I have. And the reason I'm telling this to you, because today, as we are talking about this interview, there was a tragedy happening in Tel Aviv, at the bus station again, where a fanatic Palestinian goes into a crowded bus and detonates a bomb and kills 6 or 7 innocent people. And you know why they killed him? You know why he killed him? The same reason why Hitler took us to Auschwitz. And you know what was that reason? Because we were Jews. And that's the only reason. And so, to go back a little bit with history, after World War II, the world could not live with their conscience any longer. The world had to permit the formation of a Jewish state, because the conscience of the world was so enormous.